Okay, so I was thinking recently as far as some of the prototype data for some of the ROMs and all that people have been talking about. And I noticed something with Gen 1 that I kind of forgot about. And I thought about it a little bit more, and I think I just noticed something else that's even crazier. So when Gen 1 was released, you might remember how like legendaries weren't stationary before. As a matter of fact, they were actually supposed to be just rare Pokemon you could catch multiple times, but in a certain location. And this was supposed to be in Gen 1, but they did this before they had stationary sprites for them. So, but here's where it gets even crazier. So you basically would have like Arcanine would have been a legendary, but you can catch Arcanine multiple times though, especially like near the end. So they would have had that same concept in Gen 1's beta, but what's even stranger is I feel like that's where they got the concept for the legendary dogs though, being the Roman legendaries, because you think, I mean, if there's a lot of mixed up data here, but if what I've said before is true, where like the legendary dogs were actually supposed to be in Gen 1, or they were created right around Gen 1's time, but they were moved to Gen 2. Again, Gen 1 being a sequel and a prequel to each other, so it makes sense that the data eventually found its way into the final version at some point, but in a different game though. So the prototype data suggests that the legendary dogs would have been stationary legendaries, because at that point in time that's what they decided on. So I mean, because it's weird, because if you think about it, the anime was kind of weird when it kind of introduced a lot of stuff in Gen 1, but they introduced it at such a late time that a lot of stuff was changing too, and we kind of caught some of the ideas that they originally had before that moved everything over to the later generations rather than just the previous. Like, they had so many ideas at once, but they were only using so much due to time constraints, budgets, cartridge limitations, and maybe even something else. So there was only so much they could do at the time. But I think that what they decided on was they went from having the original, like, you could have something that was so rare to catch, so hard to find too, and then those were just later on, they were limited to how many you could catch, because there was only one per playthrough unless you traded with somebody else, and that was the only way to really get your hands on another one. Because you would have, like with stationary encounters for example, you basically would have to save in front of the legendary until you either caught it, and then you would see if the stats were what you wanted, and then you'd save again, or you'd reset the game, or soft reset the game, and then just keep rolling until you get the stats you want for said legendary. But it's also interesting to point out that I'm actually kind of more convinced Lugia was actually supposed to be in Gen 1 too, right around that time. While it wasn't used in Gen 1, but they had the concept right around Gen 1. Because they figured, you know, because you had Zapdos, Moltres, Articuno, and then the legendary master would be Lugia. They had Suicune, Entei, and Raikou at the time, and then that would have been Ho-Oh's version, but they decided to take Lugia and move it to a later gen. So it's interesting, and it's even weird how like even their data, all their data was found in Gen 1's data. So it's like, how does that make sense? So they had the idea as early as possible, but they didn't use it until later on. And so and again, you can really see the ideas they changed. So like in this case, we had like legendary Pokemon that weren't legendary right away, but maybe they were legendary in a different sense, and then they later on used it as a different concept. So not only were certain Pokemon changed later on that they were legendary, because like it's weird, because like we know that Arcanine, for example, isn't necessarily a legendary, but it's still like a really strong Pokemon in its own right, that it could be a legendary. Whether you catch a Growlithe evolved with a Firestone, or you could catch an Arcanine in some cases later on in some areas. But it depends though. So that's basically probably what they were going at the time. Arcanine was one of the very first Pokemon that was drawn too, before it got a complete redo, and then they got a baby form, so, and then it also had a puppy form. So there was 2 Pokemon that was cut from its final evolution. But I think that's where they got the idea for the Roman legendaries, because it just made a lot of sense because of the legendary dogs. And they were the same type advantages as like the legendary birds. You had an ice type, but instead, well, I mean, unless you want to change it to like a water type too, because Suicune wasn't a pure ice type, but it was a water type though. So Articuno was an ice type, and then you had Suicune was a water, Entei was a fire, and then so was Moltres. Zapdos was a electric type, and then so was Raikou. And then of course, you know, Lugia was a flying type, so was Ho-Oh, but Ho-Oh was a fire type and Lugia was a psychic. Even though it should have been a water type, but they did it for balancing type advantages out. And Lugia can still technically kill Ho-Oh very easily, if its stats are high enough, of course. It's also very interesting because I found out a while ago that I think I know why they changed Lugia's shiny form. Because in Pokemon Stadium 3, which is Pokemon Stadium 2 in the English version, believe it or not, I've explained that before. But what's really weird is it was green originally, but they took that green form and gave it to Mewtwo. So they probably changed it for some other Pokemon. But what's really weird is Lugia was originally a female, even though it's a genderless Pokemon. But I think that's the concept they rolled with, because why is it more of like a magenta color in its shiny form? Its belly, at least. Because that's why. They wanted to make it look more like it was a female. So, some stuff to think about. But again, if you're not subscribed to this channel already, please subscribe. I'll be making more videos when I find more stuff. It's just, there's just so many things we don't know about the series, that whether it's a theory or it could be true, you know, or maybe it's not true now, but it was at one point, you know, and it really does make you wonder why they changed it altogether.